American Secession, The Looming Threat of a National Breakup by F. H. Buckley. Chapter 9, Bigness and Wealth. Up until this moment, Buckley has been so very favorable to smaller governments being more primed for happiness and just general efficiency of operation. But here in Chapter 9, Bigness and Wealth, the cold shower begins. And it is here that there's a bit of an analysis related to the cost and benefit of bigness and wealth. And he basically acknowledges that there are three significant advantages to bigness. And in this case, large companies have a bit of an advantage. And in fact, when we think about secession, there are potentially some costs that are associated that may outweigh advantages. And so the idea would be that secession would not be warranted. And so this chapter very much became a cost benefit analysis. In fact, he used the analogy of the Goldilocks principle. It can't be all small and it can't be all one world government because that either extreme would not really work very well. Somewhere in the middle is what we're looking for. So he explores this in this particular chapter, the three advantages, and then looks at what those costs are and how that works out in practicality. So the three advantages in summary are big countries have expanded free trade, a large country is diversified, and that there are economies of scale to purchase goods and services. Those are the three advantages. And so it breaks down as follows. So the first one, free trade. America is unique in that before the European Union existed, or now China being a rising star, America itself is was a large free trade zone. There were no barriers to entry. And in fact, when the Articles of Confederation were in place many, many years ago, the main reason why they were changed was because there was some concern about how the trade would occur between the sovereign states here in the American colonies. He'll talk a little bit more about that later, but the idea is that America itself is a free trade zone, that the 20th century belonged to America for a number of different reasons, the least of which is its large geographic size and diverse population. He claimed that is the human capital century, the 20th century, because the people of the United States invested in public education, people were put to work, and economic wealth was driven. Today, he notes that one-third of the world's trade passes free of border duties. And that may be the North American Free Trade Agreement, which is Canada, the United States, and Mexico, or now more currently, it would be places like the European Union. The critique of this, if anyone comes from an anti-federalist standpoint, the criticism is that states could have negotiated their own free trade and stayed with the Articles of Confederation. The United States would look very different, perhaps, but that is the critique of this idea of America as a free trade zone. He uses the example, being a Canadian, he uses the example of Quebec wanting to secede, the province of Quebec wanting to secede from Canada. And of course, that's been an ongoing issue over the course of decades. The idea there was that Canada or Quebec could remain in association with Canada, but have its own sovereignty. The term there is sovereignty association. That, by political wranglings, has not happened in Canada. That died very, very close in terms of votes. It may come back, but it was an issue that really the Separatist Party of Quebec has been, and most likely will probably advocate for at some point again in the future. The second point, the notion that a large country is diversified, well, he uses our old favorite Finland, which has been such a shining star up through all the chapters, but here in chapter 9, he notes that with the collapse of the company Nokia, Finland really had some significant problems. Whereas in a large country, no one business loss can collapse a country. He also talked a little bit about Iceland, just how smaller countries do have problems with an industry, a company not working out, and that causing problems for the whole country. And the last point is the economy of scale. The idea of economy of scale is that cost effectiveness is done better on a larger scale. Can, is, will the United States scale? The best way to understand this is by using the old industrial understanding of economy of scale in terms of units of production. Why did Ford, under Henry Ford's leadership, uh, was he able to produce cars at a lower cost at the time when cars were being hand built by skilled craftsmen? Well, he put those materials on a assembly line, and there are other industries that have done this as well. In fact, the gun industry did that before even Henry Ford. But the book mentions that Henry Ford did a good job of creating an economy of scale with building something like a vehicle. The cost per unit went down because it was just more efficient to put them out in large quantity. So how do you use that comparison with a country? Well, he mentions that America sort of operates like a conglomerate business, and that you have lots of layers of management, the least of which is the federal government making rules for the states. And that maybe in some cases works out well, maybe in other cases does not work out so well. So, in other words, if we are to build roads across the country, pooling our resources together and making this large project happen, or a national rail system, of course we don't have that, could be done with much more input from many shareholders or stakeholders. So those are the 3 points: the free trade of large of countries, the diversification, and of course the economies of scale. The drawbacks would be underinvestment. So do governments fund projects that are threatened by secession? And he used a really great analogy of no fault divorce. In the past, marriages had to be, if you were to get a divorce, you'd have to prove that somebody did something wrong. And with the exception of maybe just a couple, 2 or 3 states, that is no longer the case. You can just simply say, irreconcilable differences, I want a divorce. Well, what that has done, it has, of course, weakened the family. People are less willing to invest in a family, more likely to divorce. And so, as we see, divorce rates, for a lot of reasons, but the least of which is that it's easy to get divorced, there's less social stigma, people get divorced. So the family itself has been undermined. Well, likewise, underinvestment occurs in a situation where states could leave easily. If that were the case, if it were easier for that to happen, well, then states would be unwilling to invest in projects that would benefit the larger union. He talked a little bit about an interesting concept of the idea of a contract, a federal contract that would be renewable every 20 years. I guess Jefferson had proposed this. It's an interesting idea that every 20 years we get together and we say, hey, is this working? If so, great. If not, it ends. One of the other things that he talks about, post-constitutional opportunism, and really what that boiled down to, as a party decides to leave, that the parties, either the people that are leaving or the people that are staying, have the opportunity for opportunism, to not make decisions, or to use those moments to hold another party over the barrel. So it's a little bit difficult to exit where everybody feels like they're getting something out of it. And that the case that he uses to make that point is with the Canadian secession of, with Quebec, that this debate went on and on and on. It was very, very, very close in terms of getting a vote, but that Canadian voters basically just shut it down because they were sick and tired of it. So was the contract bad enough? It was bad enough to say, hey, maybe we should just call this quits, but not bad enough to say, let's end it. And then the last point of cost of secession were transaction costs, which basically boils down to what are the direct expenses of bargaining this out, and what are the distractions from other opportunities that occur. So the division of assets, as we look at a secession, division of state assets, it could be expensive. How much debt is someone willing to carry away from the union that they are now part of? There is a national debt. Buckley didn't talk about debts per se, but I'm using that as an example of, what does it cost actually to leave? How does that actually work? So these costs need to be weighed out with the large advantages of bigness. So this is I would call probably the most tense chapter of the book thus far, and here the second part of the book, because it really sort of puts a cold water bath on the idea, or it raises some very significant obstacles to that happening. So in the last few pages of the chapter, he talks about exit versus voice. So if someone is dissatisfied with a living situation, they can leave, right? They can leave and they can go somewhere where they feel that they are living more in accord with their values. Or they can stay and they can make voice to their issues and solve problems. So I have a very big disagreement with one point that he made. He said that in the American Civil War, which I sometimes take issue with that being called a civil war, it was really a war of secession that was voted on by legitimate legislatures. Buckley says that the voice may be wrong. So in other words, when Southern states voted that they were going to secede, he used the old, based on keeping slavery, that the Union was right to deny this. I think that the premise of that is completely flawed. I think that, and this is my opinion, this is not the book, but it's something worthy of considering, just in opposition to this idea that states, free associated states, for whatever reason, whether the reason was right or wrong, had the right to leave. And they did so peacefully by a democratic process. And they were brought back on the point of a gun to stay in that union. So that's, I think, a different idea that can be debated, but it's something that I personally disagree with Buckley on. And it's one more reason why the legacy of the quote-unquote American Civil War weighs so heavily on the idea of secession, that it's always colored by that. That goes right back to the first chapter. And then, of course, the last point is that if you're going to stay and work to solve problems, you should have some kind of a voice. And here in the United States, we're so very polarized and almost past talking to each other. So the idea is, well, how do you voice when neither side is talking to each other? And it's a big problem, and it's one that really is going to need to get worked out over the course of the months and years that follow if we're to solve any problems here in the United States. So thank you for joining today. The next time we're together, we're going into part 3 of the book, almost there, with the finish, called Lesser Cures. And the next chapter is chapter 10, which is called Secession Light. Thank you for joining. I look forward to the next time. If you haven't done so already, please make sure that you hit that subscribe button, like the video, and of course, as always, please leave comments. I'd like to hear from you. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Are you enjoying the series? Are you not enjoying the series? What would you like to hear more of? I look forward to your response. Thank you for your engagement.